Welcome to Forum 360. I'm Stephanie York, your host today, and thank you for joining us for a global outlook with a local view. Today we are here with Pete Nisht, Vice President of Compliance and Communications at Clutch Cannabis and The Citizen by Clutch, a company that provides medicinal cannabis products in Northeast Ohio. We are talking about the different types of cannabis, medicinal uses of cannabis, and Ohio's recently enacted a law allowing for recreational uses of marijuana. Thank you, Pete, for joining us today.
It is my pleasure.
Awesome. Well, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, so I've been in Akron for a long, long time now. I came here for college and never left. So I'm an attorney by trade. I've got an MBA, and kind of stumbled into the cannabis industry through, I guess a couple different situations that led me here. But I spent some time in local politics and worked as a civil prosecutor for the county for a couple years as well, and then found myself here.
Okay. So what is your role at Clutch Cannabis?
So I started, I'm not a day zero employee, but I started pretty early. So my first day was the day of our first harvest back in January of 2019. My job was to kind of start and build our compliance team.
Okay.
And it has changed over time. So I've done some operations, managed a couple different teams, but generally speaking right now, I run our compliance team and our marketing team and our logistics team. And then I also handle government affairs and communications. So a lot of legislative and administrative advocacy. I'm a liaison to the main trade association in the state.
Okay.
And so that's enough to make sure every day is a little bit different than the day before.
Okay, so we're going to go back to the basics. What does Clutch do? Do they grow and sell cannabis? Where are the growing operations? Things like that.
Yep. So yeah, we do everything now. So we've got a large cultivation and processing facility located in North Hill in Akron. It's a pretty nondescript building, so you wouldn't know it if you drove by it. But we have a large grow there and a big commercial kitchen and some extraction rooms and that sort of thing. So we make a whole host of products, almost anything you could imagine. And then we also have 2 stores currently. So we've got one in Canton and one in Lorain that are doing really well that started here in 2023. Okay,
so I'm going to go back even more basic.
Yeah.
Cannabis, marijuana, same thing, different things?
Yeah, so cannabis is the plant that we're talking about.
Okay.
There are a couple of different strains of cannabis that are naturally from different places in the world.
Okay.
They've all kind of been bred together for different purposes. Marijuana is really a legal term.
Okay.
Now that refers to what you would traditionally think about as cannabis. So like a psychoactive,
yes,
flower product or concentrate or something that has a medicinal or recreational effect on someone.
Okay. Now growing this stuff, is it indoor, outdoor?
We're all indoor.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's pretty difficult to grow in a state like Ohio.
I wondered if Ohio had good soil for
Ohio,
that.
Well, so Ohio does, but there's you have a lot more control indoor. So we have we've set ourselves up to create a pharmaceutical grade product, so very, very high quality, very, very high level of control.
Sure.
And really, what you're doing is you need control of the whole environment. You're recreating an entire ecosystem that this plant needs to thrive in. So everything that it needs, we have to give to it in precision doses, whether it's CO2 or light or nutrition or anything like that. Water.
It's a science.
It's a science. Yeah, it's a science as well as an art. And so indoor lets us have a lot more control over all those different variables.
Especially in Ohio, when it could be 80 in the morning and 20 at night.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So what is Citizen by Clutch?
So the Citizen by Clutch is our retail brand.
Okay.
So it's kind of it's a sister company that we started. The first store, like I said, opened I think in January of 2023 in Lorain, and it's just it's just the name of the brand. Yeah, it's our retail brand.
So what is THC and CBD, and are they both controlled substances?
So
if that makes sense.
Yes. So yes, I believe they're both controlled substances. They're treated very differently, and they have different effects. They're both cannabinoids. So cannabis is the main plant that we find in nature that produces cannabinoids. So cannabinoids are compounds that interact with your own endocannabinoid system. So we all have an endocannabinoid system.
Okay.
And it controls all sorts of things: appetite, sleep, mood. It's connected to the immune system,
Okay.
How we perceive pain, all sorts of things. So your body naturally produces its own cannabinoids, and so those cannabinoids, depending on the shape, there's a lot of you can get. You can go down
I
the
don't
rabbit
need
hole on
super
this,
scientific,
but
but
they all
like
have
I
different
know that
effects.
there's this THC
Yep.
and CBD,
Yep.
and it looks like CBD you can buy online, but you can't buy THC,
Yes.
and
So
it
well, and
gets a
that's-
little confusing.
And that's changed now. So, but generally speaking, THC is what we think of as the main psychoactive compound in cannabis.
that makes people feel high.
Yes, exactly. CBD is something. It's what I would term a minor cannabinoid, in that it is naturally present in much lower concentrations. However, people have figured out how to breed cannabis plants to produce more CBD than THC.
Okay.
And so that is kind of what kicked off this whole hemp market.
Yes, right.
All right. So there are CBD products that are actually now FDA approved, and they're used to treat epilepsy, spasticity, things like that.
Okay.
And there's also now this has gotten really complicated over the past 10 years or so.
Right.
There's also now CBD products that are ubiquitous in Walgreens and grocery stores and
Right.
online and all
It's
kinds
like
of stuff.
Yeah.
All kinds of places, and those those do probably have some amount of CBD in them, although I'm not sure that I would call them therapeutic doses of CBD, if
Right.
that makes sense.
It does.
So somebody that has a drop of like CBD in their coffee in the morning is not getting near the impact that like somebody that's taking something like Epidiolex, like an FDA approved drug.
Sure.
But there may be some medicinal value as well.
Sure.
To
And
this.
plus psycho value, like you're
so-
giving yourself something. There is
Right.
something to be said for.
Right.
I think this is helping me, so I feel
Sure,
better, and
sure,
and stuff like that. So Clutch primarily grows and sells marijuana products or cannabis products for medicinal purposes.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
Tell me what type of medical issues someone might use cannabis for.
So I'm a good example. So Crohn's disease is one. There is a small but growing number of conditions. So cancer, migraines, arthritis, chronic pain, Crohn's disease, MS, all sorts of things. And there's a full list online that you can look up if you just type in medical marijuana controlled program qualifying conditions.
Right.
There's 25 or 28 different conditions. Depending
So
on how you count.
is cannabis medically accepted as a medication in the physician world, do you think?
I think there's growing acceptance. I think that what's difficult, I think, for clinicians is that it doesn't really fit a traditional pharmaceutical framework.
Right.
Right. It's a plant that grows in the ground. If people weren't out ripping up the plants, it would be growing on the side of the road all over the place. And it's also, while not unprecedented, it's a little different to find a single plant or a single drug that can impact so many different systems in the body and mean so many different things to so many different kinds of people.
Right.
And the reason why that's so is that it goes back to this endocannabinoid system, but that's a relatively new thing that we're still trying to understand. So I think that there's a growing recognition amongst healthcare professionals, doctors, that this really can improve the quality of life and help a lot of people. I think that the other thing that's happening is we're not used to dealing with a drug that can be both medicine and a recreational substance.
Right.
Which also kind of throws them for a loop. I mean, and I understand where that would give somebody pause, right? Because
Sure. Are they
traditionally
really coming in for this illness or this pain, or are
Right,
they coming in
right,
to get medicine
right.
to get high?
Right, but it's relatively benign. Not that there aren't certain risks associated with. There's risks associated with drinking too much water, right?
Sure.
But it's relatively benign, and I think that every year there are hundreds, if not thousands, of studies that come out from all over the world showing the amazing kind of potential that the plant has.
Right.
And we're just dealing with the plants right now. I mean, we're only scratching the surface. So 10, 15 years from now, if we see federal legalization, research will be able to be conducted that's federally funded, more robust, large sample sizes,
right,
where we'll really be able to start to play with a lot of the compounds that are in the plant. I mean, there's things that we haven't really discovered yet.
Right.
I mean, there's probably over 100 known cannabinoids that are in very, very small concentrations in all of these.
Well, I just can't believe it's not like ground down, put into pills, and sold through CVS. I mean.
Right, and I think
because lots of medicines are.
Right.
Like you can do that, and like at some point, I think we're going to be seeing CVS. I mean, I don't know. I say CVS, could be Rite Aid, could be Walgreens, could be any of those, but.
It's possible. I think we do see Epidiolex. So there's a couple of these. There's Epidiolex and a couple other drugs like it that have FDA approval.
Okay.
That are either synthesized cannabinoids. Marinol is another one that's like a synthetic version of THC.
Okay.
That's used to treat the symptoms of chemotherapy, like
sure, nausea, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It stimulates appetite, that kind of thing. May help with pain. So and that's been around for a long, long time. So we do have a couple of these models that are starting to form. I think we're just scratching the surface.
We are.
So we have these two things happening in tandem now, where we have this burgeoning medical industry that is probably destined to help millions of people, and then we also have a recreational substance that is going to maybe look a little bit different, but essentially, when it boils down to it, it's almost the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's going to be kind of happening side by side.
How popular is the medicinal cannabis industry in Northeast Ohio?
I mean, I think it's popular. I think, there are, the last count I got last week was that there are 175,000 registered active patients in the state.
Okay.
I would venture to guess that maybe 10 or 12,000 of those are in Summit County. Okay. There's more in Cuyahoga County. So that's just 2 counties. That's not all in Northeast Ohio. So there's a lot. This is a big population center in the state, and so there's a lot of people using it.
Sure. And how many cannabis dispensaries are there in Akron?
So in Akron, and maybe I'll lump in Cuyahoga Falls. I think there's 2 in Cuyahoga Falls right now and 3 in Akron.
Okay. In Northeast Ohio, how many are there?
Not sure in Northeast Ohio, but there's offhand, but there's about 115 right now active in the state.
Wow.
Yep.
How does this compare to Colorado and where it really took off? Yeah.
So Ohio is like cannabis 2.0 or cannabis 3.0. So a lot of the lessons that were learned early on in the cannabis industry out west have been acted on here.
Good. So when we came out, we already knew the pitfalls and the
exactly. So it's a little bit more controlled. This is a limited license state. So I think Colorado, places like Colorado, Michigan, California, Oregon, that have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these things everywhere. Ohio is never really going to look like that.
Right.
And I don't think we want it to, frankly. Sure. I mean, we're going to do it.
We're a little more conservative.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
but certainly, it's hard to look up the number of liquor stores in the state.
Right.
But I think there's hundreds and hundreds of those.
Yes.
And we're just probably a small fraction of that.
So I want to remind our viewers and those who may have joined late that we are here with Pete Nish, Vice President of Compliance and Communications at Clutch Cannabis and the Citizen by Clutch, a company that provides medicinal cannabis products in Northeast Ohio. We're talking about the medicinal uses of cannabis, and we are about to talk about Ohio's recently enacted law allowing for recreational uses of cannabis. So let's talk about the forms of cannabis. I mean, when I was in college, you only heard about people smoking it or baking it in brownies, right? So can you even buy the smokable form now at a dispensary?
You can, but you cannot legally smoke it.
Okay, tell me about that.
Right,
it doesn't make any sense. You can buy it, but you can't smoke it.
There's a couple quirks to Ohio's program. So one of them is that traditionally, like if you bought cannabis in Michigan or Colorado, the typical package quantity would be 1/8 of an ounce. Ohio mandates that we sell it in 10th tenth ounce increments. So 2.83 grams. So you can get 2.83 or 5.66 or 14.15 or 8.49 or something like that.
Okay, whatever.
Whatever. So the other thing is that we are a no combustion state. So we can sell flour to people.
Flour means like the leaves?
Just exactly, not leaves, but
what are they?
So we're all used to seeing the 5 or 7 leaf caricature of like cannabis leaf. Flour is what we're after. So that's the medicinal. That's what has medicinal properties or recreational properties.
Okay.
And it's literally the flower of the female cannabis plant. That is what you typically would have found. That's what you would have purchased in college.
Okay,
and
not me, but let's be clear. But yes,
that's what somebody would have. That's what I may have.
Yes.
And that's what people would have rolled into a joint and smoked.
Sure.
All right. So you can do that. It is going to be legal now that Issue 2 has passed. It's my understanding is it's not legal to use it for products purchased in the medical program by medical patients.
Okay. You're an attorney. You have your law degree, as do I.
Yep.
Reformed attorneys, I like to call them.
Yeah, exactly.
I bet you were working hard on the law that came out, or at least trying to understand it. It recently passed for recreational use of marijuana in Ohio. Tell us about this law.
Yeah, so there was a group called the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol that put this together a couple years ago now. It's an initiated statute, which I think is a better vehicle for this kind of thing, because that means that it can be changed and tweaked. As we learn more, the legislature can have their say as well.
Okay.
That kind of thing. So.
But they know that the citizens want it.
But the citizens want it. I mean, overwhelmingly, I think it had a 14-point lead. So 57% of people that voted on it.
Were you surprised by that?
It came dead in line with the polling.
Okay.
And I personally was not surprised, because I think so. Part of what happens when you're in the cannabis industry is that you have to come out, right? Hey, like, I actually support this, and you think that's going to be a big deal,
right?
And people kind of look at you sideways at first, but then what happens is family gatherings, when you're at your work, or when you're
grandma so-and-so finds it helps with their cancer
treatment.
People
start coming out of the woodwork and saying, I actually use it too, and I get all my stuff from Michigan. I've been getting it from Michigan for years, and that kind of thing. So just, surveying my neighborhood. Yeah. And I had an individual, that I was friendly with. He was like, well, finally, I'd known him for a year or two at this point, and we were talking about it one day, and he's like, well, just so you know, that house, like everybody here uses it. Okay. So I wasn't surprised. Wow. Just because I think that's a good, once you come out of the closet, people are willing to be honest with you about it. And I think that in a state like Ohio that's a little bit more socially conservative, there's still a taboo about talking about it.
There is.
But there's not necessarily a taboo about using it in the privacy of your own home. Okay.
Were you afraid, with the very conservative nature of our legislature, that this wouldn't pass, or that now that it's passed, are you afraid that the constraints are going to be so onerous that it's not going to get off the ground like people want it to?
So I think that the legislature is probably has a lot of people that have had a similar experience. Okay. To me. Okay, so meaning that it's now a topic of conversation, and they probably have people coming out of the woodwork who wouldn't normally say anything that are saying, hey, actually, I go up to Michigan and I get gummies and I give them to my mother because, it's the only thing that helps with her migraines or something. Right.
It's the only thing that gives her
relief from appetite, or, so that's I think that's happening. I think, the other thing is that they're probably looking at their districts and seeing how many more people voted in favor of it than against it, even in conservative districts. And I think it won in the vast majority of legislative districts in the state. So I think that's why we're seeing the governor, as well as members of the legislature, saying now, we're going to respect it. We're not repealing it. This is what we recognize that people wanted this, and so we're gonna move forward and we're gonna let them have it. I think that what concerns me really about changes, and I think that probably everybody expected there to be maybe some changes. Sure. what concerns me about the changes is our market's ability to compete with all of these other sources of cannabis in the state. And what I mean by that is that I don't really see there being multiple markets for cannabis. Like there's not a legal market and an illicit market and a Michigan market. There's just one market filled with consumers, Ohioans,
Yep.
that are making a decision on a daily basis where they're going to purchase those products from.
Right.
All right. They're getting hit up on Instagram to buy psychoactive hemp products.
Sure.
The ads are. I mean, I get half a dozen of them a day.
Right.
Pushed to my phone for flour and gummies and all kinds of stuff that really claim to do the same thing that the products we make do. People have found it really cheap and easy to go to Michigan, where things are plentiful, the taxes are low, that sort of thing.
Yep.
They also are really comfortable in a lot of parts of the state, just going down the street and purchasing from somebody that they've known for a long time, that either grows it or procures it and then resells it. Okay, and so in order to compete with those, we have to be regulated in a way that allows like our value proposition to prevail here. So this isn't really like our market does not behave any different than like any other market in the country, right? Or in any other industry. It's at its foundation, it's a commodity. It reacts to regulation the same way.
Yep.
Simple like supply and demand issues are very much at play here. You know, they affect price and availability and how much people can grow and that kind of thing.
Sure.
So what we're worried about is that regulations would be put in place in statute that would make our products uncompetitive, and that would essentially
more onerous for you to put out there than for the person down the street that's growing 5 plants.
Exactly. So like what I'll give you a couple examples.
Yeah.
So right now Michigan has a 16% tax rate all in on cannabis. There's a 10% excise tax at the state level. That's a retail tax.
Okay.
And then there's a 6% sales tax. They don't do local sales tax like Ohio does.
Okay.
So issue 2 put in place a 10% excise tax at the retail level.
Okay.
And then also applied sales tax. So for us, that hovers around like 16.5 to 17.8%, depending on what county you're in.
Right.
So we're already, if you do the math, you're already at 16.75 to 17.8% compared to Michigan's 16%.
Right.
All right. So that is more or less like right in line. I would say that we hit the sweet spot there.
Yes.
If we went to like a 26% sales tax or a 30% sales tax, like all of a sudden the products become less competitive because just based
pricing
on price,
it out of the market.
You're pricing people out of the market, and they're going to keep going back to the suppliers that aren't taxed.
Yeah, if you can get the same thing for cheaper, you're going to go for cheaper.
Illicit is no taxes.
Yep.
Hemp, the psychoactive hemp is just sales tax. Michigan is 16%.
Okay.
And it's the products are probably cheaper because they're more plentiful there.
Sure.
And then we would be taxed, out of control, right? So people aren't going to purchase.
Right.
The same thing is going to happen with the potency cap. So like people that are going to participate in this market have an expectation that they're going to be able to purchase the same kind of products in Ohio that they would purchase, in Michigan or Colorado.
Absolutely.
Or maybe in the illicit market, right?
Right.
Ohioans, when they voted on issue 2, voted for what I think are reasonable potency caps for flour and concentrates. And we would be one of the only states in the country that has legalized recreational cannabis that has potency caps. But like I said, they're reasonable. Mm-hmm. If we would get something that's, I think, more extreme, like a 50% potency cap on vapes and concentrates, what that does is it essentially monopolizes or creates a monopoly on the kind of products people want to purchase, and hands it over to the illicit market and to Michigan and maybe to Pennsylvania.
Or you have to buy twice as much to get the same effect that the people want.
Exactly. Or you just use
price
twice
yourself
as much.
out again.
But also for those products, it necessitates us to like add in filler and things that people don't want to ingest anyways, right?
Right.
So like what we're hoping is that we find some common ground in that, like we need to have a program that is not going to drive people away from the products that we make. There's already going to be a premium because we are regulated. There's inventory control, compliance, quality, safety, security regulations. All these things cost money, and I think people are going to be willing to pay for those things. But they're not going to be willing to pay for them if the same product is available for much cheaper
Absolutely.
from a different source.
Do people still need a medicinal card? And do you suggest they get it?
Yeah, I do. So right now we're in this limbo period where it's legal to possess and use and to grow it, but sales haven't been turned on yet. So
Sure.
like I'm not allowed to sell it to you at our dispensary yet.
Right.
We expect that to happen around September. So in order for people to kind of continue to get the same safe, clean, tested products that they're getting, we are recommending that you keep your medical card.
Right.
And I think also so I came to this, you kind of asked what my background was. I
Yeah.
kind of came to this because I have Crohn's. So, I'm somebody that I think has benefited from a doctor-patient relationship
Sure.
in this context. And I think that a lot of people still will benefit from a doctor-patient relationship.
Well, I have like 20 more questions to ask you, but we're out of time,
Oh,
if you can
no.
believe it. So thank you for
Thanks.
the interesting discussion about marijuana and cannabis. Who knew there were so many different types and forms? And all the medicinal uses for cannabis, including cancer, Crohn's, arthritis, and more. I particularly appreciated your perspective around the legalities of recreational use of marijuana in Ohio and what companies, well, we were going to get into what companies should do with HR, but we didn't quite get there yet. So maybe I'll have you back on to talk about
Okay.
that. So thank you for teaching us about this, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you for joining us. I'm Stephanie York. Thank you for joining us today for Forum 360 for a global outlook with a local view.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.